when my mother slapped my husband at Christmas dinner. She broke the back of the woman who spent 15 years funding her lifestyle. I'm Lucille Vance, 42, a senior cost estimator. They thought my silence meant compliance. They didn't realize I was already calculating the cost of their eviction. As a senior cost estimator for municipal infrastructure projects in Toledo, Ohio, my entire life is built around structural integrity. I look at a bridge, a retaining wall, or a water treatment plant, and I don't see concrete. I see the unseen load-bearing supports. I see the stress fractures before they reach the surface, calculating exactly how much weight a structure can take before it suffers a catastrophic failure. For 15 years, I applied that same skill to my family. When my father passed away and left my mother Beatrice with a heavily mortgaged colonial home and absolutely zero savings, I was the one who stepped into the gap. I didn't do it for praise. I did it because that's what a good daughter does. I adjusted the margins of my own life, worked 60-hour weeks analyzing blueprints, and quietly routed a portion of every single paycheck to keep her afloat. I paid her property taxes, her heating bills, and the premium insurance that kept her in her comfortable suburban bubble. Now, I know some of you sitting at your own kitchen tables tonight have been that person. The one everyone calls when the car breaks down, or the tax bill comes, or the roof leaks. You do it because you think if you just carry enough of the load, eventually, they'll love you for who you are, not just what you can provide. You swallow your own needs, telling yourself that keeping the peace is worth the cost. But structural integrity isn't just about holding things up. It's about knowing when a beam is too rotten to save. My husband, Sean, was the only person who ever tried to lighten my load. We've been married for 8 years. Sean is a heavy equipment mechanic for the county. He's a big man, 6'2", with broad shoulders and calloused hands that always carry a faint, clean scent of orange soap and motor oil. He grew up in a mobile home park on the edge of town, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep shoes on his feet. He has never tried to pretend he's something he isn't. He's proud of his trade, and so am I. When we married, he brought his 3-year-old daughter, Lily, into my life. Lily is 11 now, a quiet, sensitive girl with her father's gentle eyes, who loves drawing and still holds my hand when we walk through the grocery store parking lot. My mother, Beatrice, and my sister-in-law, Courtney, live in a world of fragile, expensive glass. Courtney is married to my younger brother, Todd. Todd works a mid-level marketing job, but they live like they're heirs to a steel fortune. Mostly because Courtney's parents have money, and they like to make sure everyone knows it. Courtney wears cashmere sweaters, speaks in a high, nasal drawl, and looks at my husband as if he's a grease stain on her pristine, white carpet. Todd just sits there during family gatherings, nodding along to her nonsense, too terrified of losing his comfortable lifestyle to ever speak up. It was Christmas night, and the dining room in my mother's house was warm. The room itself is beautiful, at least on the surface. I paid for the new drywall 3 years ago when the plaster started crumbling from a roof leak that I also paid to fix. I paid for the double-hung windows that keep the harsh Ohio winter draft out. The table was dressed in a white linen cloth, laid out with the family's vintage Nora Take china, the delicate plates with the chipped gold rims that I spent my teenage years carefully hand-washing. At the center of the table sat a 7-pound prime rib crusted in garlic and rosemary. I bought that roast. I spent $240 on it at the local butcher because my mother insisted that cheap meat ruins the holiday spirit. The trouble started somewhere between the salad course and the main carving. Courtney was talking about her recent ski trip to Aspen, her voice cutting through the soft holiday music playing in the background. She was complaining about the lack of service class work ethic these days, looking directly at Sean. It's like people who work with their hands think they're doing you a favor just by showing up, Courtney said, swirling her Pinot Noir, another bottle I had paid for. Todd and I had to wait 45 minutes for the valet in the freezing cold. I told Todd, these people just don't have any ambition. That's why they're stuck in those dead-end jobs. I watched Sean. He was quietly cutting a piece of meat for Lily, keeping his eyes on his plate. He's used to her little digs. He usually just lets them roll off his broad shoulders for my sake, wanting to keep the holidays peaceful for me. But Courtney wasn't done. She loved having an audience, and my mother was smiling, nodding along as she buttered her roll. Honestly, Sean, Courtney continued, her smile thin and sharp as a razor, I don't know how you do it. Working in the freezing mud all day, surrounded by people who can barely spell their own names. Don't you ever worry about the influence on Lily? You want her to have a real future, don't you? Not just, well, ending up back where you started, in a trailer park. The room went dead silent. Todd suddenly found his water glass incredibly interesting. My mother took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, her eyes gleaming with silent approval. Lily stopped chewing, her fork hovering in the air, her eyes darting between her father and Courtney. Sean placed his fork down. It made a small, sharp clink against the Noritake china. He looked up, his face calm but his jaw tight, a muscle jumping in his cheek. Courtney, he said, his voice low and steady. My guys can spell just fine. They also happen to keep the county's snowplows running so you don't slide your luxury SUV into a ditch on your way to the mall. And as for Lily, she's going to be whoever she wants to be. Her grandfather lived in a trailer, and he was the most honorable, hard-working man I've ever known. Honorable? Courtney laughed, a short, ugly sound that scraped against my nerves. Is that what we're calling it now? It's called a lack of choices, Sean. Let's be real. It's a trailer trash mentality, and it's lazy. Sean didn't yell. He has never raised his voice to a woman in his life. But he stood up. He's a big man, and when he stands, his presence fills the room. He looked down at Courtney, his voice vibrating with a father's protective anger. You can look down on me all you want, Courtney, but you will not speak about my daughter, and you will not disrespect my family at this table. Before Sean could even finish his sentence, my mother stood up. Her face was flushed red, her eyes wide with a strange, venomous fury. She didn't look at Courtney, who had started the entire fire. She looked at Sean as if he were an insect that had crawled onto her expensive tablecloths. She stepped around the table, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor, the same floor I had paid $3,000 to have refinished after my father died. Slap. The sound was incredibly loud in the small dining room. It was a hard, open-handed strike that caught Sean squarely across his left cheek. His head snapped back slightly, a dark red mark blooming instantly on his skin. Don't you dare raise your voice to my family in my house, my mother hissed, her voice trembling with a lifetime of unchecked privilege. She leaned in, spitting the next words right into his face. You'll always be trailer trash, Sean. You don't belong in a home like this. Take your daughter and get out of my house. I sat perfectly still. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. My heart didn't even race. Instead, a profound, icy silence settled over my mind. It was the exact same feeling I get when I look at a structural blueprint and realize the foundation is completely, unsalvageably cracked. You don't try to patch a crack like that. You don't throw more money at it. You walk away before the whole thing collapses on top of you. I looked at my mother. She was standing there, chest heaving, looking triumphant, as if she had just defended her kingdom. I looked at Courtney, who had a small, smug smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. I looked at Todd, who was still staring at his plate, refusing to meet my eyes. Then I looked at Lily. Her eyes were wide with terror, tears silent and fat rolling down her cheeks as she clutched her father's hand. Sean was standing perfectly still, his hand hovering near his stung cheek, his shoulders tense. But he was looking down at his daughter, trying to shield her with his body. I stood up. Lucy, tell him, my mother said, turning to me. Her voice instantly shifting to that demanding, petulant tone she always used when she wanted me to clean up her messes. Tell him he can't speak to us like that in my home. I didn't say a word to her. I didn't even look her in the eye. I walked over to Lily, took her small, trembling hand in mine, and looked at Sean. Let's go, I said softly. We walked out of the dining room. Behind us, I heard my mother call out, "Lucy, where are you going? The pie isn't even served yet." We walked up the stairs to the guest room, where we had planned to spend the holiday weekend. My hands were perfectly steady as I pulled our suitcases out from the closet. I packed Lily's neat little sweaters. I packed Sean's flannel shirts. I packed my own clothes. The only sound in the room was the quiet rustle of fabric and Lily's soft, hiccuping breaths. "I'm sorry, Luce," Sean whispered from the doorway, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't mean to ruin your Christmas." I stopped packing, walked over to him, and placed my hand gently over the red mark on his cheek. "You didn't ruin anything, Sean," I said, my voice steady and clear. "You just helped me see the real cost of this house. And it's a price we are no longer paying." Within 10 minutes, we were downstairs. My mother, Todd, and Courtney were still in the dining room. They hadn't even followed us up. They assumed, as they always did, that I would cool off, that I would apologize for Sean's outburst, and that tomorrow morning, I would be in the kitchen making breakfast and fixing whatever was broken. We walked out the front door into the freezing Ohio night. The snow was falling in heavy, silent flakes, coating the lawn and the porch steps. I locked the door behind us, slipped the key into my pocket, and we got into our truck. As Sean backed out of the driveway, I looked at the beautiful colonial house in the rearview mirror. It looked so warm, so perfect, with the Christmas lights glowing along the roofline. But I knew the truth. I knew every rotten timber, every unpaid bill, and every single lie that held those walls up. I closed my eyes and let the warmth of the truck heater wash over my face, knowing that the daughter who fixed everything had just officially clocked out. The morning of December 26th didn't bring the usual post-holiday slump. It brought a crisp, freezing clarity that rattled the frost-rimed windows of our modest 3-bedroom ranch in South Toledo. I woke up at dawn before the furnace could fully kick in, wrapped in a faded green quilt that my grandmother had stitched by hand. In the kitchen, the air smelled of freshly brewed hazelnut coffee and the faint, comforting scent of the orange soap Sean used to scrub the grease from his hands. I found him sitting at our small oak kitchen table, the one he had, painstakingly sanded down and resealed with clear polyurethane 3 summers ago. He was wearing his heavy canvas work jacket over his t-shirt, his large hands cupping a steaming ceramic mug. The left side of his face, where my mother's hand had struck him, was still slightly swollen, a dull, yellowish bruise forming along his jawline. Lily sat next to him in her flannel pajamas, quietly drawing a winter landscape in her sketchbook, her colored pencils arranged in a neat, protective row. They didn't hear me walk in, but when Sean looked up and met my eyes, the tension in his shoulders visibly eased. He didn't ask me if I regretted leaving. He didn't ask me if I was going to call her. He just reached out, his rough, calloused fingers wrapping around mine, squeezing gently. At exactly 7:42, my phone began to vibrate against the laminate countertop. The caller ID simply read, *mom*. I let it ring, and ring. On the 4th vibration, I picked it up, pressed the receiver to my ear, but remained completely silent. "Lucille? Lucille, thank God you picked up." My mother's voice came through the speaker, high-pitched, trembling, and utterly breathless with performed agony. I could hear the theatrical sniffling, the rustle of a silk tissue. "You have to come back over here right now. Courtney is absolutely beside herself, and Todd is refusing to speak to me because of the scene your husband caused. I haven't slept a wink. My blood pressure is through the roof, Lucille. You need to fix this. You need to tell Sean that he has to apologize to Courtney so we can put this awful evening behind us." I listened to her chest heave on the other end of the line. For 15 years, this was the exact frequency that would have sent me into a panic. I would have played the mediator. I would have apologized for things I didn't do, sent a massive flower arrangement to Courtney, and quietly slipped my mother an extra $500 to help her settle her nerves. "Lucille? Are you there? Why aren't you saying anything?" Her voice lost some of its trembling victimhood, replaced by that familiar, sharp edge of maternal authority. I expect you here by noon. We still have the leftover prime rib, and we need to discuss how we're going to handle the winter property tax bill. It's due next week, you know. I am not coming over, Mom, I said. My voice was incredibly quiet. It was the same level, detached tone I used when I had to inform a municipal contractor that their concrete mixture had failed a core compression test. And I am not fixing this. What do you mean you're not fixing this? She gasped, her voice rising an octave. I am your mother. I raised you. How dare you take that tone with me after the way your trailer trash husband insulted my guests in my own home? It is my home, Beatrice, I said softly. And you have exactly 30 days to find another place to live. I hung up before she could scream. I didn't block her number, but I set her contact profile to silent. I looked down at the phone, my heart beating with a slow, heavy rhythm. I know some of you sitting at your kitchen tables right now are holding your breath. You felt that hot flash of terror when you finally speak the truth to a bully who shares your DNA. You worry that you're the bad guy, that the family will point their fingers at you and call you cold, ungrateful, or cruel. I felt that weight pressing down on my chest, but then I looked at the bruise on my husband's face and the way my 11-year-old stepdaughter was watching me, her eyes wide and hopeful, and the weight vanished. Lucy, Sean said, his voice low and cautious. Are you sure about this? The fallout. Todd and Courtney will make your life a living hell. Let them try, I said, walking over to the hallway closet. Deep in the back, behind the winter coats and the plastic bin of holiday decorations, sat a dented gray steel locking box with a heavy brass padlock. My father had given me that box when I passed my licensing exam as a cost estimator. Asterisk, keep your receipts, Lucy. Asterisk, he had told me, his voice raspy from the emphysema that eventually took him. Asterisk, people lie. Numbers don't. Asterisk. I brought the heavy steel box to the kitchen table, set it down next to my coffee mug, and retrieved the small brass key from my keychain. The lock clicked open with a satisfying metallic asterisk snap asterisk. Inside were 15 years of structural evidence. As a cost estimator, my brain naturally organizes chaos into neat, undeniable rows. I pulled out a thick, cream-colored folder labeled asterisk Maplewood Drive, title, and mortgage asterisk. When my father died in 2009, he left my mother with a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial house in a mountain of hidden debt. She had no savings, no professional skills, and a refusal to adjust her lifestyle. To prevent the bank from foreclosing on the family home, I had stepped in. I took out a new mortgage in my name, purchased the property from my father's estate, and allowed my mother to live there under a verbal agreement that she would pay the monthly property taxes and insurance while I handled the principal mortgage payments. Naturally, she never paid a single cent. I pulled out the ledger. It was a simple black and white composition notebook where I had recorded every single transaction since November of 2009. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the columns. Asterisk mortgage payment, $1,250, month, paid by Lucille Vance. Asterisk. Asterisk property taxes, $4,600 a year, paid by Lucille Vance. Asterisk. Asterisk homeowner's insurance, $1,800 a year, paid by Lucille Vance. Asterisk. Asterisk sump pump replacement 2015, $2,100. Paid by Lucille Vance. Asterisk. Asterisk roof repair 2018, $8,400. Paid by Lucille Vance. Asterisk. Asterisk hardwood floor refinishing 2021, $3,200. Paid by Lucille Vance. Asterisk. I did the mental math in less than 3 seconds. Over 15 years, I had poured over $320,000 of my own hard-earned money into keeping my mother in that colonial house. I had worked late nights in the trailer of dusty construction sites, analyzing blueprints and arguing over the cost of gravel and steel, while my mother drank expensive wine and Courtney sneered at the lack of service-class work ethic. And the worst part? The deed to the house was solely, completely in my name. My mother was, under Ohio law, a tenant at will. She had no legal claim to the property. She had no lease. She had only my guilt and my misplaced sense of daughterly duty keeping her warm. "Sean," I said, looking up from the paperwork, "do you remember Darlene Higgins?" Sean smiled, a genuine, warm expression finally breaking through his tense face. "The retired title clerk from the county office? The one who used to bring us those homemade lemon bars?" "That's her," I said, reaching for my phone. "She knows every real estate attorney and housing inspector in the Tri-County area. And more importantly, she knows exactly how to file an expedited eviction notice without a single bureaucratic delay." I dialed Darlene's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice gravelly from a lifetime of unfiltered cigarettes, but instantly alert. "Lucy! Merry Christmas, sweetheart," Darlene chirped. "Don't tell me you're working today. You're supposed to be resting." "Darlene, I need a favor," I said, leaning back in my chair and looking at the neat columns of numbers in my ledger. "I need to file a formal 30-day notice to vacate for a residential property. And I need it drafted, notarized, and served by tomorrow morning." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint rustle of Darlene shifting her weight in her recliner. "Lucy, are we talking about the Maplewood property? Your mother's place?" "Yes," I said. "The foundation is completely rotted, Darlene. It's time to demolish the structure." "Well, thank the Lord," Darlene muttered, her voice filled with a fierce, protective satisfaction. "I've been waiting 10 years for you to realize that woman was bleeding you dry. Give me 2 hours. I'll call my nephew Leo Heese, a process server for the municipal court. We'll have the paperwork drawn up and ready for your signature before the snow stops falling." As I hung up, I felt a strange, quiet peace settle over me. It wasn't anger. Anger is hot, volatile, and temporary. This was something else. This was the cold, calculated precision of an engineer realizing that the only way to save the surrounding landscape is to let the crumbling bridge fall. I closed the gray steel box, turned the brass key in the padlock, and looked at my family. "Lily, sweetie," I said, reaching out to ruffle her hair, "how would you feel about taking some of your savings and looking at vacation cabins in Michigan for the summer? I think we're going to have a lot of extra room in our budget from now on." Lily looked up, her eyes shining with relief, and nodded vigorously. But as I smiled back at her, my eyes drifted to the window, watching the heavy gray clouds roll over the Toledo skyline. I knew this was only the first load-bearing wall to go. The real storm was about to hit, and my mother would soon realize that the daughter who fixed everything had finally decided to tear it all down. By 10 o'clock the next morning, the snow had stopped, leaving Toledo wrapped in a thick, suffocating blanket of white. I sat at my dining room table with Darlene's nephew, Leo. He didn't look like a typical court-appointed process server. He was a soft-spoken young man wearing a heavy Carhartt jacket, his boots leaving small puddles of melted slush on my linoleum floor. But the folder he held in his chapped hands was the most formidable weapon I had ever possessed. "It's all standard, Ms. Vance," Leo said, his voice quiet as he pointed a blunt finger at the signature lines. "This is the formal 30-day notice to terminate tenancy at will under Ohio Revised Code Section 5321.17. Since there's no written lease and she's never paid rent, she's legally a tenant at will. I'll hand-deliver this to her, post a copy on the front door, and file the proof of service with the housing court this afternoon. After 30 days, if she hasn't vacated, we file the eviction complaint." I stared at the black ink on the crisp, white paper. My name, Lucille Vance, was typed at the top as the landlord. My mother's name, Beatrice Vance, was typed below as the tenant. It looked so cold, so official. I know some of you reading this are shaking your heads. You're thinking, asterisk, how could you do that to your own mother? How could you put her out on the street? Asterisk. But let me ask you this. How many times do you let someone spit in your face while you're paying for the privilege? How many times do you watch the person you love most in the world, the man who works himself to the bone to build a decent life for his family, get humiliated by people who have never earned a single dollar of their own? I signed my name. The ink was wet, glistening under the kitchen light. "Thank you, Leo," I said. "Please deliver it today." Once Leo left, the real work began. The silent, invisible execution of a financial decoupling. For 15 years, my mother's life had been seamlessly integrated into my bank account. She didn't have to think about money because I did all the thinking for her. I sat down at my laptop, opened my Fifth Third Bank online portal, and began the meticulous process of untangling our lives. If you've ever had to sit down at a computer and click cancel on the life of someone who gave you birth, you know the hollow, sickening feeling in your stomach. It's not anger that guides your fingers. It's a profound, heavy exhaustion. I went to my automatic bill pay settings. First was Toledo Edison. Her monthly electric bill, which averaged $280 because she insisted on keeping the colonial house at a balmy 74 degrees all winter, was linked directly to my checking account. I clicked asterisk. Delete payee asterisk. Next was Columbia Gas of Ohio. Her heating bill. Asterisk delete payee asterisk. Then came the City of Toledo water and sewer bill. Asterisk delete payee asterisk. The most painful one was the premium homeowners insurance policy with State Farm. If that policy lapsed and something happened to the house, the financial loss would be mine, since the property was in my name. But I didn't cancel it. Instead, I changed the billing address from my home to hers, switched the payment method from my automatic Visa card to a paper invoice, and set the due date for 30 days out. If she wanted the house insured while she packed her things, she would have to write the check herself. Finally, I opened the shared credit card account. 10 years ago, I had given her an authorized user card on my account for emergencies only. Over the years, emergencies had morphed into weekly trips to the high-end grocery store, expensive haircuts, and department store purchases. I clicked on the card management tab, selected the card ending in 4092, and clicked asterisk cancel card asterisk. As I closed my laptop, my phone began to vibrate. It didn't stop. The first wave of calls came at exactly 12:15. I didn't answer. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping a cup of black tea, watching the screen light up. Mom calling asterisk asterisk mom. Calling. Asterisk. Asterisk Todd. Calling. Asterisk asterisk mom. Text message. Lucille, what is the meaning of this? A man just came to the door and handed me a legal paper. He taped one to the front door. The neighbors are looking. Call me immediately. Asterisk. I let the phone buzz until it timed out, then I picked up my mug and walked into the living room. Sean was on the floor, helping Lily assemble a complex wooden marble run she had received for Christmas. He looked up at me, his eyes searching my face for any sign of regret or panic. I gave him a small, reassuring smile. I wanted him to know that the foundation of our little family was solid, even if the earth was shaking around us. At 1 o'clock, the phone rang again. This time, it wasn't my mother. It was Todd. My brother has always been a coward, but when his wife's comfort is threatened, he suddenly finds a temporary spine. I decided to answer. I wanted to hear exactly how they were going to justify what had happened. Lucille, have you lost your mind? Todd's voice exploded through the receiver before I could even say hello. He sounded frantic, his breathing shallow. Mom just called me crying hysterically. She says you served her with an eviction notice? On the day after Christmas? What is wrong with you? Nothing is wrong with me, Todd, I said, my voice as level as a plumb line. In fact, for the first time in 15 years, my vision is perfectly clear. You can't do this, Todd yelled. She's 68 years old. Where is she supposed to go? You own that house, Lucy. You've paid for it for years. Why are you suddenly acting like a monster because of a little family argument? A little family argument? I repeated the words slowly, letting them hang in the air. Todd, your wife insulted my husband and my stepdaughter at a table filled with food that I paid for. My mother stood up and physically assaulted my husband in front of my 11-year-old child. And then she threw him out of a house that I own. Courtney was just talking. She didn't mean anything by it, Todd protested, his voice cracking. And Mom was just emotional. You know how she gets. Sean shouldn't have stood up like that. He intimidated her. Sean stood up to protect his daughter from your wife's venom, I said. And as for Mom, she has 30 days to find a new place to live. If she needs help packing, I suggest you and Courtney buy some boxes. We can't take her in, Lucy, Todd blurted out, the truth finally slipping past his defenses. Courtney's parents are staying with us for the next 3 months, and besides, Courtney and Mom can't be under the same roof for more than 2 days without fighting. You know how they are. That sounds like a structural problem in your own home, Todd. Not mine, I said. You're being incredibly selfish, Todd hissed, his voice dropping into a cold, resentful tone. You've always thought you were better than us because you have that fancy job and you handle the money. But this is low, even for you. Courtney is right. You've married into a different class of people, and now you're acting just like them. Cold, heartless. Felt a slight pinch in my chest, a fleeting ghost of the old guilt trying to claw its way back into my throat. But then I looked at Sean. He was sitting on the floor, his massive shoulders hunched over as he carefully aligned a wooden track so Lily's marble wouldn't fall off the edge. He was a good man, a decent man, and these people had spent years treating him like he was nothing more than the dirt under their fingernails. Todd, I said, my voice dropping an octave, filled with a quiet strength that made him go silent on the other end. I have spent over $300,000 keeping our mother in that house, so you and Courtney could play act at being wealthy without having to support her. I had paid her taxes, her utilities, and her insurance, while you bought luxury cars and took ski trips. If wanting my husband to be treated with basic human dignity in a house I pay for makes me heartless, then I am happily heartless. Do not call this number again. I hung up. Before I could even put the phone down, another notification popped up. It was a transaction alert from my banking app. Asterisk declined transaction. Kroger number 402, $184.50. Card ending in 4092. My mother had just tried to use the emergency credit card. The realization of what was happening was finally starting to sink in for her. The golden faucet had been turned off. The silent execution of my boundaries was no longer a threat on a legal document. It was a physical reality at the grocery store checkout line. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. It was my mother. I answered. Lucille, she whispered, and for the first time, she didn't sound angry. She sounded terrified. The theatrical sniffling was gone, replaced by a raw, ragged panic. Lucille, please. My card was declined at the grocery store. I had to leave a full cart of food at the register. The cashier looked at me like I was some kind of criminal. I canceled the card, Mom, I said softly. Why are you doing this to me? She sobbed, her voice breaking. I am your mother, Lucy. I carried you. I raised you. How can you treat me like this over one mistake? I was just trying to protect my home. It isn't your home, Beatrice, I said, using her first name for the first time in my life. It's mine. And you didn't protect it. You destroyed it. I listened to her weep on the other end of the line. A long, mournful sound that would have broken me just 24 hours ago. But today, it just sounded like the wind whistling through a structural crack. It was loud, it was dramatic, but it didn't change the fact that the building was no longer safe to inhabit. I ended the call, placed the phone face down on the counter, and walked over to join my family on the floor. As I sat down next to Sean, he reached over and placed his warm, heavy hand on my knee, his eyes filled with a quiet, unspoken gratitude that was worth more than any colonial house in the world. The first load-bearing wall had crumbled, and as the dust began to settle, I knew the real battle was still to come. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one trying to hold up the ceiling. By the second week of January, the reality of my silence had begun to freeze the ground beneath my family's feet. The dirty gray snow of midwinter Toledo was piled high along the curbs of Maplewood Drive as I pulled my truck up to the curb. Next to me sat Darlene Higgins, her hands clad in thick, hand-knitted purple mittens, and behind us in a neat silver sedan was Richard Miller, a licensed residential appraiser I had hired to assess the property. I sat for a moment with the engine idling, the heater blowing a dry, noisy draft across my face. If you've ever had to return to a place where you were deeply humiliated, you know the physical weight that settles into your joints before you even open the car door. Your stomach tightens into a hard knot and your instincts scream at you to turn the key, put the truck in reverse, and go back to the safety of your own warm kitchen. I felt that pull. I looked down at my hands, resting on the steering wheel, and remembered the sound of my mother's hand striking Sean's face. I remembered the tears on my stepdaughter's cheeks. I turned off the ignition. "You ready, Lucy?" Darlene asked, her voice soft but steady. She reached over and patted my arm. "You don't have to do this alone. I'm right here." "I'm ready, Darlene," I said. "So let's get this done." I grabbed the forest green leather portfolio from the console. It was an old, slightly scuffed folder that had belonged to my father. He used to keep his union carpentry documents in it. It still smelled faintly of cedar and aged paper. Inside were the original deed to the colonial house, the 15-year ledger of my payments, the certified mail receipts showing that the 30-day notice to vacate had been successfully served, and the bank statements proving that the utility accounts had been transferred out of my name. We walked up the shoveled driveway. The house looked beautiful from the outside, but as we stepped onto the front porch, I noticed the front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and walked into the foyer. The air inside was cold. My mother had clearly lowered the thermostat, likely because she had finally received the first paper gas bill under her own name and realized exactly how much it cost to heat 4,000 square feet of drafty colonial charm. We didn't even make it past the entryway before they appeared. My mother, Beatrice, was standing at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a heavy, cream-colored wool cardigan that I had bought her for her birthday 2 years ago. Down in the living room, sitting on the sofa, were Todd and Courtney. Courtney was dressed in a pristine designer puffer jacket, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, while Todd sat next to her, looking pale and chewing on his lower lip. They had been waiting for me. They had probably been watching from the window, hoping I was coming back to apologize, to cry, to beg for their forgiveness and hand over a check to fix everything. "Lucille!" my mother called down, her voice echoing in the cold, high-ceilinged hallway. "What is the meaning of this? Who are these people you've brought into my home?" "Good morning, Beatrice," I said, my voice calm, flat, and entirely devoid of the anxiety that used to define my interactions with her. "This is Richard Miller. He's a certified appraiser. He's here to do a full structural and market valuation of the property so we can list it for sale." Todd stood up so fast his knees nearly hit the coffee table. "For sale? Lucy, you can't sell this house. We told you. Mom has rights. We've talked to a real estate attorney, and he said you can't just throw an elderly woman out of her primary residence without her consent." I walked into the living room, Darlene and Richard following closely behind. I set my father's forest green leather portfolio down on the dining table, the exact spot where, just weeks ago, my husband had been called trailer trash. I know some of you sitting at your own tables right now have had to face a united front of people who share your blood, but none of your values. They stand together, puffed up with indignation, trying to make you feel like the crazy one, the cruel one, the one who is breaking the family apart. They use big words like rights and legal action to scare you back into your quiet little corner. But here is the secret. Bullies only have power when you let them set the rules of the game. "Todd," I said, opening the portfolio with a slow, deliberate movement. Which attorney did you speak to? Because if he told you that a tenant at will who has paid $0 in rent, $0 in property taxes, and $0 in insurance over 15 years has a legal right to occupy a property against the owner's will under Ohio law, you should ask for your consultation fee back. I pulled out the certified copy of the deed and slid it across the table. The deed is in my name and my name alone, I continued, looking my brother dead in the eye. The mortgage is paid off by me. The 30-day notice was legally served by a process server on December 27th. That gives Mom until January 27th to vacate the premises. If she's not out by then, Richard's appraisal will be the baseline we use when we file the formal eviction complaint with the housing court on the morning of the 28th. You wouldn't dare, Courtney sneered, standing up to join Todd. She gripped her designer handbag like a shield, her nose tilted upward in that familiar gesture of absolute superiority. Do you have any idea how trashy this makes you look? Evicting your own mother? What are your neighbors going to say? What are the people at your country club going to think? I don't belong to a country club, Courtney, I said softly. But speaking of country clubs, I reached into the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a printed bank statement from my personal savings account from April of last year. Todd, do you remember this transaction? I asked, pointing to a highlighted line. A wire transfer of $3,500 to your personal checking account. You called me at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, crying, because Courtney's family was coming to town and your joint credit cards were maxed out. You told me that if you didn't pay the annual country club assessment that week, your name would be posted on the unpaid member list in the lobby and Courtney would never forgive you. You begged me not to tell her. The room went completely, utterly silent. Courtney's head snapped toward Todd, her eyes widening in a mixture of shock and sheer rage. You did what, Todd? You told me your bonus cleared early? Todd's face went from pale to a deep, blotchy red. He looked at the floor, his shoulders slumping, his hands trembling in his pockets. Courtney, things were tight, and I was going to pay her back. He never paid me back, I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. Just like he never offered to help pay for Mom's roof, or her plumbing, or her property taxes. You see, Courtney, you like to talk about the service class and their lack of ambition. But the truth is, your entire luxury lifestyle is built on a foundation of debt and the charity of the sister-in-law you look down on. I turned my back on them and looked at Richard Miller, who was trying very hard to pretend he was looking at the crown molding. Richard, please go ahead and start your walkthrough, I said, giving him a polite nod. Take all the photos you need. Make sure to document the plaster damage in the hallway. I paid to have the roof fixed, but the cosmetic work still needs to be done. Understood, Ms. Vance, Richard murmured, quickly pulling out his digital measuring tool and slipping out of the room. A second later, the faint, bright red laser dot of his tool appeared on the dining room wall, measuring the distance from the floor to the ceiling right above the spot where my mother had slapped my husband. My mother walked down the stairs slowly, her hand gripping the banister. The dramatic weeping victim routine was gone. She looked small, cold, and incredibly old in the gray winter light filtering through the double-hung windows. Lucille, she whispered, her voice cracking as she stepped onto the hardwood floor. How can you do this to me? I am your mother. I gave you life. And I gave you 15 years of luxury, Beatrice, I replied, using her first name with a quiet, devastating finality. I paid for the food on your table, the heat in your radiators, and the very floor you're standing on. I did it because I loved you, and because I thought that eventually you would see me as a daughter, not just a line item in your budget. But on Christmas night, you showed me exactly what I am to you. You showed me that my husband, the man who actually loves and protects me, is nothing more than trash in your eyes, and that my stepdaughter is a burden. I picked up the forest green portfolio and tucked it under my arm. I am no longer paying the bill for your contempt, I said. You have 19 days left in this house. If you need help finding an apartment, I suggest you ask your son. After all, he has a very nice country club membership. I walked toward the front door, Darlene walking right beside me, her chin held high. As I opened the door to the freezing Toledo air, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had calculated the load, identified the failure point, and walked away before the collapse could take me down with it. The moving truck arrived on Maplewood Drive on a Tuesday morning in late January. I didn't go to watch. I didn't need the satisfaction of seeing my mother's expensive sectional sofa being loaded into the back of a rented yellow truck. Nor did I want to witness Todd sweat through his designer coat as he carried boxes of Nora Take china down the steps. Darlene kept me updated, sending a single text message when the driveway was finally clear. Asterisk, the bird has flown the coop. House is locked. Keys are in my hand. Asterisk. 2 weeks later, the sale of the Maplewood Colonial was finalized. The housing market in Toledo was steady that winter, and because I had kept the structural integrity of the house in perfect condition, we closed quickly. I sold it to a young family, a high school history teacher and his wife, an ultrasound technician, who had a toddler and another baby on the way. When I handed over the keys at the title office, the young mother had tears in her eyes. She told me they had been outbid on 3 other houses and couldn't believe they finally had a yard for their children. I smiled, my heart feeling lighter than it had in 15 years. I knew that yard, I knew the soil. For the first time, it was going to be filled with the laughter of children who were loved unconditionally, rather than the heavy silence of unpaid obligations. After paying off the remaining small balance on the mortgage and settling the transaction fees, I was left with $312,000. I didn't buy a new car. I didn't book an exotic vacation. I walked into our local credit union, paid off the remaining $15,000 on our modest ranch home in South Toledo, and deposited the rest into a high-yield savings account designated entirely for Lily's college fund. I remember sitting at our kitchen table that evening, looking at the paid-in-full mortgage statement. Sean came up behind me, his large, warm hands resting on my shoulders. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against my hair, smelling of his orange soap and the cold winter air. "We're completely debt-free, Luce," he whispered, his voice thick with a quiet sort of awe. "We are," I said, reaching up to cover his hands with mine, "and no one can ever hold a roof over our heads again. I know some of you sitting at your kitchen tables tonight are waiting for the other shoe to drop. You're waiting for the grand, cinematic apology from the people who hurt you. You think that, for the story to be complete, they have to crawl back, fall to their knees, and admit every single thing they did wrong. But life isn't a movie script. In the real world, toxic people rarely have a sudden awakening. They don't change their character just because you finally set a boundary. They usually just find a new audience for their drama. Todd and Courtney stopped speaking to me entirely. From what Darlene gathered through the local gossip mill, Todd had to withdraw from the country club to help pay for my mother's new living arrangements. Courtney was reportedly furious, blaming me for ruining their social standing, but I didn't care. Their opinions of me had ceased to be a currency I traded in. My mother moved into a quiet, one-bedroom senior apartment complex called Whispering Pines, located about 15 minutes from Todd's house. It was clean, safe, and modest, far cry from the 4-bedroom colonial, but entirely appropriate for her actual financial reality. Todd paid her rent, and for the first time in his life, he was forced to carry the load I had carried alone for 15 years. For months, there was nothing but silence between my mother and me. I didn't call her on Easter. I didn't send a card. I spent my spring planting heirloom tomatoes in our backyard garden, watching Lily help Sean build a wooden trellis for our sweet peas, and reclaiming the quiet spaces of my own mind. Then, in early May, the silence broke in the most ordinary way. I was at the local nursery on South Detroit Avenue, picking out some hanging petunia baskets for our front porch. The air was warm, smelling of damp earth, fertilizer, and the sweet, green scent of greenhouse oxygen. I was carrying a flat of red geraniums when I turned the corner of the outdoor perennial aisle and saw her. My mother was standing in front of a display of lavender plants. She looked different. She wasn't wearing her expensive cashmere or her pristine jewelry. She was wearing a simple light blue windbreaker and a pair of sensible tennis shoes. Her silver hair, usually styled in a perfect, rigid coif, was pulled back in a simple clip. She looked smaller than I remembered. She looked 68 years old. My first instinct, the old, deeply ingrained habit, was to turn my cart around and hide. My heart gave a familiar, painful thud against my ribs. But then I looked down at my hands, dirty from checking the soil of the geraniums, and I felt the solid ground beneath my feet. I had nothing to hide. I had done nothing wrong. I walked forward. "Hello, Mom." She jumped slightly, turning toward me. For a second, a flash of the old, defensive anger crossed her face, her chin rising in that haughty gesture I knew so well. But as she really looked at me, the tension seemed to drain out of her. The anger was replaced by a heavy, fragile exhaustion. "Lucille," she said, her voice quiet. She didn't scream. She didn't call me ungrateful. You're buying geraniums." "I am," I said, keeping my voice level, polite, but firm, getting the porch ready for spring. She looked down at the lavender plant in her hand. Her fingers, spotted with age, trembled slightly against the green plastic pot. "They don't have a garden at the apartment, just a small balcony. The leasing office says we can have pots, as long as they don't drip onto the neighbors below." "Lavender does well in pots," I said softly. "It likes the sun." "Yes," she murmured. "The balcony gets a lot of afternoon sun." We stood there in the middle of the nursery aisle, surrounded by the vibrant, blooming life of spring, and the silence between us was heavy, but it was no longer hostile. It was the silence of two people who had finally stopped fighting a war that had no winners. She didn't apologize for slapping Sean. She didn't ask me to come back and fix her life, and I didn't offer. "Todd tells me Lily is doing track this spring," she said, her eyes still fixed on the lavender. "She is," I replied, a small, proud smile touching my lips. "She's running the hurdles. She's very fast. She always was a determined girl," my mother said. She finally looked up, meeting my eyes. There was a deep sadness in her gaze, a recognition of the vast, unbridgeable distance that now lay between us. But there was also a quiet acceptance. "I'm glad she's doing well, Lucille." "Thank you, Mom." She hesitated for a moment, as if she wanted to say more, to reach across the chasm we had built, but she didn't. Instead, she gave me a small, tight nod, placed the lavender plant into her red plastic shopping basket, and turned to walk toward the checkout counter. I watched her go. I felt a pang of sorrow, not for the relationship we had now, but for the relationship we could never have. It was a grief for the mother she couldn't be, and the daughter I had to stop being in order to survive. But as I watched her small, retreating figure, I realized that the pain didn't break me. It was just a cost I had finally learned to budget for. I drove home with the windows rolled down, the warm spring breeze filling the cab of my truck. When I pulled into our driveway, Sean was sitting on the porch steps, a wrench in his hand, cleaning the grease off his fingers with his orange-scented soap. Lily was sitting next to him, her long legs stretched out, laughing at something he had said. They looked up as I got out of the truck, their faces lighting up with the simple, uncomplicated joy of seeing me return. I carried the flat of geraniums up the steps, and Sean stood up to take the heavy tray from my arms. He didn't ask me where I had been, or why my eyes were slightly red. He just kissed my forehead, his lips warm and solid against my skin, while Lily reached into my pocket to steal the pack of sunflower seeds she knew I had bought for her. I know now that structural integrity isn't about building walls that can never be broken. It's about knowing what is worth holding up and what must be allowed to fall. Love isn't a ledger where you track every sacrifice, hoping that if you pay enough, you'll eventually earn the right to be respected. Love is a gift, freely given, and it only thrives under a roof where everyone is safe from the storm. I sat down on the porch steps next to my stepdaughter, wrapping my arm around her shoulders as the afternoon sun began to dip below the Toledo tree line. Knowing that the foundation we had built right here was strong enough to hold us up for the rest of our lives.